of the recording in progress. We have a recently formed climate team in the Southeast Michigan Sierra Club group. And we're going to have a meeting to follow up on this one and the inspiration and ideas and thoughts we have to talk about how things might be implemented, what we want to do. On Tuesday, June 18th at 7 o'clock by Zoom. I will put the Zoom link in the chat and my own email. What I'd like is, and we got several people, I think, already here who've been to these meetings, and as we've started to form this group to do climate work in Southeast Michigan. And what I'd like is for anyone else who's interested in coming to that meeting, or further meetings, getting on our list to be notified about meetings and activity on climate in Wayne, Oakland, Macomb, St. Clair counties in Southeast Michigan, to either email me or put a little note in the chat with your email address. And I will get you on the list and keep you informed, and we'll follow up. So that meeting is on Tuesday, June 18th at 7 o'clock by Zoom. Thank you, Andrew. Take it away.
I guess that means I'm up. Well, it's lovely to see so many friends and familiar faces on here. And I'm so glad that Fred got to give that announcement, because the whole campaign idea was actually his. And I totally stole the title from Fred and Turn Oakland County Green and their great work. So thank you for that inspiration. So I've got some slides for you. The former professor, some of those pieces remain in how I give talks and think about these things. So thanks for that introduction to Andrew. So most of my life, actually, I grew up in rural Iowa as a conservative caucus goer, if you can imagine. So politics has always been in the lifeblood a bit, and I was a forester before I took the deep dive into policy work and got my PhD, and was professor at Western, as Andrew said, for about 15 years. Led our climate change working group there, led our campus We Vote project. So I've done a lot around these issues. Yeah, I see my Kalamazoo friends are here tonight. Thank you for coming out. And in 2022, 2 years ago, actually, it was just my 2-year anniversary of being executive director of the Michigan Climate Action Network, and made the leap into full-time advocacy, because I don't have to tell all of you the urgency of this moment that we are living in climate and in our response to it. As you all know, we really have the next 2 years, maybe 7 years, to make a difference for the next 1,000 years. And that's why I do this work full time. And I bet that's all while you're here at 7 p.m. on a night when you could be doing a lot of other things, right? So I will talk about a few things tonight. I really want to focus on some of our public attitudes around climate change. One of the big messages of the work that I did as a social scientist, and that informs the Michigan Climate Action Network, is that we are the majority, folks, and that we actually live in one of probably the most counter-majoritarian democracy in the world. That our public attitudes are not in line with our policies, right? And there are some reasons for that, a couple of which we'll explore tonight. Some of it's us and what we do, and some of it's them, right? The fossil fuels and those industries. And then I want to talk, as Andrew said, about our climate voter campaign and what we can all do, hopefully together this year and moving forward. So I do like to start with this idea. If you're not familiar with the Yale Climate Change Program Communications, it is an excellent resource. And just so you know, I'm going to show a lot of polls. I might go a little fast. You're going to get the slides. I'm happy to send any resource your way. You can throw those questions in the chat. I'll probably wait till the end to take questions. So save that question. Anything you want to know more about, happy to discuss a little bit later. But one of the things that Yale does really well are these nationwide surveys. And you can drill this data down down to Michigan if you haven't seen this before. And they put America into 6 global warming categories. And from the left of the scale are the most alarmed, the most concerned. And we have our cautious group that is really relying on social norms and cues to take their action, a big group that is very, very movable. If you add those 3 categories together, the folks who are most concerned and alarmed and motivated to take action, that's 75% of the American population, folks. Okay. When we look at straight polling, even in Michigan, 72% of Michiganders know that climate change is happening, and 66% of them are concerned. And I show you this because we need to understand that in most rooms that you're going to go in, right, 7 out of 10 folks are with you, right? We are the majority and we should be acting that way. And again, there's reasons that we don't, that I think tonight's talk will help us all understand. At the other end of the scale, of course, are the dismissives, the folks who, that 9%, it's fluctuated from maybe 7% to as high as 11%, but essentially has not changed over time. And Yale has been doing this survey since 2013 up until the last year. And so that tells me if that number hasn't changed in that long a time, I'm probably not going to change those folks' mind, right? And they're going to believe what they're going to believe. And so we don't spend a lot of time. My former life was a lot of how are we going to talk to folks? How are we going to move that group? Instead, what I get to do now at the Michigan Climate Action Network is to activate all the folks who already believe in climate change, right? True collective action with 7 out of 10 of us in every room, we should be able to do this. And that's what we're all about. Our main mission is to amplify all of the work that all of you are doing, to connect leaders in a way that we can support each other and learn from each other and do this together for an overall impact of meeting those My Healthy Climate Plan targets, but we think we can do even better than that. Our overall vision for Michigan is that we're a leader and that this widespread, durable public support is really translated into policies and actions that ensure that sustainable home for us. For example, we want to exceed those mitigation targets. We want to make sure your zip code doesn't predict your climate and health outcomes. We think that we can do a lot on the social norms. Again, thinking about that cautious group and moving that into an action group. Really, we are a social species that relies on cues and how others behave. And our overall goal is to get everyone involved in building power for the climate movement overall. And the good news is we're a network. So I love that you belong to Sierra Club, that you belong to every other group. That is great, because what we want to do is mobilize all of the climate action from all of those different groups. And there's a variety of tactics and techniques and approaches in the network. And we hope those all can complement each other rather than compete. So that's what we're kind of all about. And I really take that majority mission and from the social science to heart when we think about who we're trying to activate and what we're really trying to do here at MyCan. So I will warn you, we're going to do a lot of polls, a lot of graphs. It's going to be fun. And again, just think of any of those that you don't understand or want to know something more about later. We can try to go back. So the big point that I want to show with these first is, again, let's really dive into we are the majority. What does that mean? And what does that really look like when we ask a series of questions? And most of these are from the Yale program on climate change. And they do a 5-point political scale. And you'll see the dark red at the bottom on ours is the conservative Republicans to a moderate Republican to our moderate conservative Democrats to liberal Democrats. And the one to watch is this black line in the middle. That's all registered voters, right? And I show these polls because as a political scientist and thinking about elections, candidates and officials, they look at and respond to polls, as I'm sure most of you know, right? They're looking at all of this stuff, and we need to understand it so that we can utilize it better in our own work. So what we have here, right, is that over half of registered voters understand that Congress, president should be taking these kinds of actions. Of course, we see this partisan divide, right? And if we think about the Yale six global warming Americas, the dismissive and doubtful at that lower end of the scale, those often fall into, of course, our Republican category. And it's good news, of course, that there's the majority here. And the sort of bad news, right, that you're all aware of, and hopefully I'm just going to prove to you tonight in graphs in many ways, is that unfortunately a certain segment of the Republican Party has been captured by fossil fuel interests, right? This is decades of a mis and disinformation campaign and anti-democratic strategies, frankly, right? In making a certain segment of the population feel that there's no way to address climate change. When we really look at the value bases that are driving both the six global Americas and the partisan divide that we see that the Republican Party, the dismissive and doubtfuls, are very much more aligned with the independent worldview, right? This is I can do this myself. We don't want government control. We want free market pieces, all of those kind of things, versus the egalitarian worldview that we're socially interdependent, that government is a ready solution. And that's really why we see this divide. But again, the majority of folks are with us, even when you think about this whole scale. Most voters are supporting climate-friendly policies. And this, again, is where we see that drop off in our conservative and more Republican friends. But if we think about how we frame these, right, this top one, helping farmers improve their practices, right, that gets even our most conservative Republican friends to join the cause. And 42% of Republicans are supporting tax rebates and credits. Any kind of, again, economic incentive policy is going to win a bipartisan approach. This is why we have the Inflation Reduction Act at the federal level, right? This is an economic incentive policy. And so it was much more palatable, even though, of course, we didn't get a bipartisan vote on that. You see even the Democratic Party catering to this vocal minority to make sure those policies are going to be palatable. The more that we require fossil fuel companies, mandate pieces, right? That's where we're going to get more and more of this drop off from the very conservative side of the aisle. But again, look at all the plurality and majority of folks who are supporting these policies overall. And that's true even here in Michigan. These polls are from the Center for Data Progress. This was from last April and early summer. Many of you remember the power outages, especially I'm talking to folks in Southeast Michigan. These good timing for polls, right? Do we want our legislature to do things? Yes. Again, 38% of all likely voters say we're doing too little here in Michigan, right? 50% of Democrats are saying that, 40% of independents are saying that. We see our drop off with our Republican and more conservative friends, of course. But again, that is because of a very successful mis and disinformation campaign, as well as lobbying interests. And what I want to point to here and in the next slide is we also, though, see in Michigan, and we see this nationally too, much more concern and activation in our BIPOC communities, our Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And that's, of course, we hopefully know why, right? We are a very justice-centered approach here at the Michigan Climate Action Network. These folks are already feeling those impacts. We know that those populations are disproportionately affected by climate change, and they are showing it in their polling and in their own voting and actions. That is really starting to increase. A majority of Michiganders also want us to move to the clean energy grid. So same kind of graphic here from the Center for Data and Progress of all likely voters, right? And look at these net pieces over here is really the easiest column to look at. All likely voters is a plus 28 for us in increasing the resiliency of our grid by moving to clean energy sources. Of course, we see the same partisan divide with 83 plus 83 in Democrats and a minus 33 for our Republican friends. But again, look at the disparity and the difference between Black and African-American Michiganders. Net 71 of cleaning up the grid. Again, why? Because, of course, power outages, those effects are happening to our low income and minority and historically marginalized friends more often not able to overcome those. So we want this, right? And we need this from a justice-centered approach. Remember those Black voters, because it's going to be a little bit important later on when we talk about voting rights and why it's so important to activate certain populations who we know are very much more committed to taking that climate action, right? Our BIPOC friends want us to be allies and make this happen. The good news, I know this one's a little hard to read, so I'll walk you through it. Yale gets a little complicated sometimes, but these are the main questions, right, that we've been asking for, I don't know, 40 years. Is global warming happening? Is it human cause? Do most scientists agree? I'm worried about global warming. And on the right here are self-identifying as Democrats. We won't see a lot of change in there. And on the left are self-identifying Republicans. And this scale, though, is by age group. Right? This is the silent generation, our 1920s on, our boomers, Gen Xers like me, and then millennials from when this study was done. And so the thing to watch, right, is our 56% of millennial Republicans agree, yeah, this is happening, versus only 43% of the silent generation in that same Republican Party. 42% of millennial Republicans understand it's human cause, which is huge because when we think about problem identification in political science, you got to understand that it's fossil fuels, right? And so that solution can follow. 42% of Republican millennials understand that versus only 19% of the silent generation. 44% of millennials know that scientists and understand the science versus 27% of silent. You get the picture here. The really, really good news is that across the political spectrum, youth is a category that undeniably embraces and understands what is happening. And again, why? We can think about them as the most impacted group, right? I know we're all going to have long, wonderful lives, but those young people are still going to live longer than me. And they're coming up in an age of climate impacts and are going to experience more and more of those impacts in their lifetimes. And they understand that. And so it has become an issue for them. Don't discount our Republican friends, right? Especially the younger that they are is a huge thing. And one of the pieces that, you know, if there are candidates or there are folks who work on in bipartisan ways here, I really hope that our candidates are looking at this, right? Because the electorate is changing. And normally what should happen in a democracy is that a party will respond to this kind of in-party change, right? We're seeing a little bit of that, but the Republican intransigence to climate change is going to have to either lose voters because these young people want climate to be an issue, or change their positions. And this is really where we can make a huge, huge difference in the politics overall of climate change. It's happened many times before. Many of us on the screen remember at least the Clinton era, where this same shift kind of happened in some other social values, and before that in the Eisenhower administration as well. So this party electorate change really, really does matter. And our youth group, when we ask, you know, what is there, can we have a climate first, climate as your top issue, no matter respective of party, almost 30% of young people say climate is my top issue, right? This is a hugely important. And what's so interesting on here, especially since most of us are going a little gray, is that gray is the new green, folks, right? The other side of this movement that's so much fun and so interesting is that it truly is intergenerational. And the next highest category are the 65 plus, the folks that fought for the original environmental movement, that are seeing their legacies destroyed, but that now have the money and time to think about climate. It's why Bill McKibben, right, 350.org has a whole new piece called Third Act to get these folks activated, because they're our second highest group of folks saying, I'm voting on climate first. This is what is most important to me. These are the groups that we can activate, right? Luckily, most of our 65 plus folks are engaged in the political system. We have a lot of work to do, as many of you know, around our youth populations on civic engagement. And that's a lot of what our targeted pieces are for. So back to this, so kind of why do we not have nice things then, right? Hopefully I've convinced you that I'll go back, that the majority of us know that climate is happening and support these policies. So why don't we see them? And the first answer is it's a little bit of us, okay? We have to take a little ownership. And that's what this is about. And again, really why Michigan Climate Action Network exists and what we're trying to do. If you take all of the surveys from Yale on that 6-point global America scale over the last 10 years that they've been doing that survey and compile them, which is what they did in the top. This is the overall numbers from that time. And what they then did was say, well, hey, these are supposedly the most alarmed folks, meaning they are concerned, they are motivated, they should be acting, right? When Yale asked this question, it turns out the answer is no, not really. Even our most concerned folks, 20% are inactive. Yes, 34%, all the people on this screen, you are being active, right? You are doing it. But what's interesting to me as an organizer, 46% of that category is willing to take action, but is not doing it. That is where organizations like Sierra Club and us come in, folks. There are barriers, of course. What do I do? How do I talk to elected officials? These are all solvable barriers that our organizations can work together to create the kind of materials that we need and solve what we call in social science, the attitude behavior gap. It works out to only about 8% of the US population is really exhibiting some high level of climate action. And that really could be just anything from signing a petition to talking to an elected official to belonging to one of our groups and moving that needle. So we have a huge opportunity to engage so many folks, again, who understand what is happening, are very concerned and motivated, and just need that next push of what do we do and how do we do that, and that support of our organizations. A little bit more of it's us. One of the big problems is we don't perceive that social norm for acting on climate, riding my bike, eating less meat, all the things you know how to do as an individual. Showing those is really, really important. And we're seeing that definitely uptick. But the other big thing, if you listen to Dr. Catherine Hayhoe at all, this is where she gets her main advice. We got to be talking about it, folks. Only a third of us actively discuss global warming. And only about a third of us are even hearing about it in the media on a weekly basis. Now, here's where I want to pull some of these threads together. And there was a great study in Nature Communications from 2022 that explored, well, what's going on here? If all these people believe in climate change, are concerned, they're not really taking action, why aren't they talking about it? Why would that be? And what this study found is it is really a false perception of that majority. It's why I start most of my talks with the idea that we are the majority. These policies are supported by even the plurality of conservatives and Republicans. But when we ask Americans, hey, how many people do you think believe or are concerned in climate change? Most folks will answer less than a quarter of the American population. They'll say, oh, maybe like 2 out of 10, or maybe 3 out of 10 at most are with me on this. When what I just showed you, right, and what we know, it's actually the opposite. It's 7 out of 10. But because I believe that I'm in the minority, and because unfortunately we live in an era of political violence, folks are literally afraid to talk about climate out loud. And again, this has been a well-orchestrated campaign of mis and disinformation and lobbying and those pieces, because we are really in the tyranny of the minority, which is something that our founders, they thought about tyranny of the majority, right? But not of the minority. And this vocal minority is making it seem like everyone is against climate change. No one really wants this. This is just, bad politics. That's not true at all. And we have a lot of work to do to overcome that perception and that misunderstanding of where we actually are as an American public. So if anything that you do, and one of our resources that's out there is to talk about climate with friends, neighbors, and other voters that you know, because it is still hugely important to just take that step. And I like to show this because public opinion, when it's paired with action, can matter, right? We have done this before, my fine friends. It was called the environmental decade of the 70s, built on all the activism of the 1960s. Public opinion for clean air and water was in the same percentages that we see right now. Now, granted, it was not yet made into a politicized partisan issue, right? But that public opinion paired, though, with something we call salience in political science. And salience means, yes, your politician is looking at those polls and saying, oh my gosh, I guess 70% of people believe this. But, I don't really see it, Denise. Where are they at? Are they at the rally? Are they asking me questions about it? Are they taking action? Is there an Earth Day like there was in 1970? That's what they're looking for. Not just that poll, but that you're going to vote on that issue, that it really matters enough to your civic engagement. And I know some of you are reading those vote totals. Whoa, what a days those were in the 70s, right? Before the partisanship of environment and climate. Can you imagine now a unanimous vote in the US Senate for a Clean Water Act, for an Endangered Species Act? This is the true power of public opinion when it is combined with that level of activism that is just, again, undeniable that this is what we need to do and where we need to go. We had a whole decade of that action. And those are those 65 plus people out there, right? They're like, hey, we did this once. We're going to do this again. We're not going to let these protections roll back. I think that this is happening again. I think that we are in this era. We are seeing the salience and the activism, the political civic engagement, right? Again, not just I'm concerned, I care about this. I'm ready to do something about it, and I'm ready to hold my democratic institutions that should be responding to the majority will of the public accountable. We see that in citizens' climate lobbies, climate voter campaigns, which we're also borrowing from, right? Hugely. We see that in the Sunrise Youth Movement. We see that in the People's Climate March, Standing Rock. And there are these amazing youth leaders around the world driving the idea that the public will is being subverted by the fossil fuel industry. And we have an opportunity to hold that system accountable and require our institutions to respond to this crisis. Yes, they're all young women. I know the future is female. Sorry, guys. There's a whole male crisis as well, but we can talk about that another time. It's happening again now. I am convinced we are in this moment, and that's why we are all doing what we do. So the converse of that, what else explains U.S. policy? Instead of pluralism and public opinion and majority, this is what Americans really, really want being enacted. We are instead in a period of what would be called elite rule or elite theory, meaning, right, that the few who have a lot of power, in this case, a lot of money, are changing the rules and subverting the system to their own interest rather than the public interest. There's 1,000,001 great studies out there that are showing us the influence of money in politics from fossil fuel industries, right? Not just the mis and disinformation campaign that has misled so much of the public, but has been lobbying and giving money to politicians for so long. That is an entrenched system, right? And what's interesting is most folks, when you ask them, right, that's what the poll is on the right, they understand this. Does the fossil fuel company have too much influence on government decisions? Even our Republican friends would say yes. That 40% is probably the highest we've seen a conservative Republican answer here. Folks get this on a visceral level, even without knowing all of the data and all of the pieces that are under that. But this is just well known in political and social science. So this also played out in Michigan's recent Clean Energy and Jobs Act. And I want to walk through it just briefly, because this is what our climate voter guide is actually built on, to target everyone running for the House this year. It's really built on what we got and what is still left on the table from the 2023 piece. So of course, you all know we elected a trifecta of Democrats, gerrymandering, it turns out, districts matter, right? Who the voters are really, really matters. And then we could enact some of these policies. So on the left here of the screen is what we actually passed. And on the right are some of our and other organizations' critiques, or like, what else did we really need to do? So of course, many of you were following this, requires our utilities to generate 60% of their electricity, this is electricity only, right, from renewable sources by 2035, and an overall 100% clean energy goal of 2040. Many of you are familiar with the distributed cap or the solar cap here in Michigan, and it would increase that from the paltry, 1% up to 10% under this legislation. And for the first time, our Michigan Public Service Commission has to also, and as well as affordability and reliability, include climate and health and equity in their decisions around our utilities long-range plans. We fought very hard for those pieces, and there were a lot of things that were left in the bills that are problematic from our perspective. And the big thing on the right column here is that definition of renewables includes a lot of fossil fuels and false solutions, folks. It includes things like biomass and biogas, landfill gas, waste incineration. The goal of clean energy also includes many of those types of fossil fuels, including natural gas with carbon sequestration. And it left out a couple really interesting bill packages, which were bipartisan, by the way, around eliminating that solar cap altogether and enabling what's called community solar. So even here in Michigan, the read of these policies and how we were able to win the wins and why these other pieces didn't quite make it, even with our Democratic trifecta, is the same answer as why we don't have nice things at the federal level or the international level. And most of the reporting and the folks who worked on these bills, at the top, you saw a lot of these, right? Absolutely historic. And we can put that word historic into some context though, right? Without action for 50 years, just about anything is historic at this point. So we take a little grain of salt on that one. But most of the other, why weren't these other things? Again, there's bipartisan legislation introduced already for community solar. Why couldn't we get that passed? The main understanding and reason for the blocking of some of the more bolder and equitable policies, all three of Michigan's environmental justice groups, for instance, did not support this package and decried it during the process. All of the fingers really pointed to, again, the influence of fossil fuels in our state that is really channeled through the investor-owned utilities. So you have DTE, I have a little bit better over here with consumers. I think consumers gets a D and DTE gets an F on some of your scorecards, right? But the song remains the same, right? What is really still blocking and stopping, even from a progressive legislature, the most boldest policies is still that influence of money and politics from the fossil fuel industry. We have to address that, right? And what I'm saying is one way to do that is to continue with our piece of pluralism and to just outperform, right? To make sure that the public is heard. So I'll move into our kind of like civic engagement and some of the voting pieces, and then talk a little bit about some of the actions that we're doing here with our climate voter guide. Now, when I talk about civic engagement, there's a lot of things, right? That could be when we think about activating that public that is concerned, and how are we really going to overcome the influence of money and politics and the fossil fuels messaging tactics. You could be shopping local, right? You could be civically engaged in an economic way. You could be volunteering in your community. You could be doing, you could be read culturally, like what you read, what you listen, those social norms, right? Again, just talking about it, doing the arts and the advocacy piece. Just one piece out of all of that is voting, right? So just remember that. But I'm here to talk about voting, so that's all I'm going to talk about next. But do think about civic engagement as a hugely broad category with so many different ways to engage in this movement and to take this to the next level. Voting And one reason why I think, I focus and so many of us focus on voting is, of course, it's the one thing that all of us, right, 18 and older get to do. It should be the easiest of all the civically engaged things that we have on our plate to be able to do. Okay, one vote, all right, got to do that one day, right? So everybody votes, right? Yeah, sorry, I know. Not really. So this most of this next data set comes from the US Elections Project. There's been tracking our voting turnout since the Constitution, since 1789. Okay, folks. So a wonderful source of data and pieces, because from a political point of view, right, it's all about turnout. Turnout absolutely matters. And you can see some of the ebbs and flows, right, as we expanded the electorate over time to, of course, white men, to, of course, the after the Civil War, to include black men. Oops, sorry, moved my screen the wrong way. To then women in 1920, to Native American women years after that, at least at the US level, to the 60s. You see some of that up and down. But the main thing, right, is over time, as a political scientist, we were decrying that no one votes. And in fact, the US, of all worldwide democracies, we fall in the bottom third of how many of us actually turn out to vote. But just like I told you that I think that this movement is really expanding into more action, we see some evidence for that here as well. Over the last few years, our voting turnout has been starting to creep up. And of course, you'll see a huge difference. The presidential elections always turnout is higher than our midterm elections. So you're going to see that same disparity gap in presidential and midterm in the next few slides that I'll show. But mostly I'm getting a little excited about this upward trend here of voting as, again, hopefully the easiest and the one thing every citizen should be able to do in order to turn this around. There are, of course, still disparities and injustices in our access to the ballot. And we see that playing out when we look at turnout rates, for example, by race. We still see our non-Hispanic white, so white folks are our orange, yellow line, the Black population and the blue line, non-Hispanic other is the green, and overall Hispanic. Now remember, I told you that BIPOC voters, so our Black and Hispanic friends, are much more concerned about climate change, right? And are willing to take more action. And so any increase in the voting population and a change in the electorate to increase that vote share will make a difference. Turnout, turnout, turnout. And you see candidates make a difference, right? The 2018, 2008, and 2012, right? Representation and candidates matter. With a Black candidate at the top of the ticket, we got more turnout. It really, this is like, I know Justice 101 for so many of you, but it really, really does matter. If we can increase the vote share of just some non-white, we will have a much better chance at achieving a climate voter election. And the same thing is true. I know we want to harp on these young people, right? So I'm gonna give them some grace here. But we see a very similar thing when we look at voting turnout over time by age, right? So over 60s, our orange line here at the very, very top, most likely to vote, right, by far. And again, these dips and ups and downs are presidential to midterm. Our blue line is 45 to 59, our green line 30 to 44, and this pink line, always lower, 18 to 29, right? Still voting less than their older generations. But we still can see in all these, right, you see this little upward trend. We saw millennials knock it out of the park, right? In 2020, even the 2018 midterms. Look at this difference in youth voting, right? Between 2018 and 2014. And that is sticking with us. That is not a blip, right? Many political scientists thought, well, that's just one election. It was a little less in 2022, but it didn't return to this very low rate of 20% or less, right? We are increasing and changing the electorate. We're just not changing the electorate as fast as the climate is changing, is one of my taglines out there, right? And the more, again, that we could increase the youth vote. That's why folks, right, are so concerned about this, because you now also know that that's the population most concerned about climate. And a third of those voters are going to be climate voters already. So whatever we can do to increase that turnout is going to be in a climate voter favor. Now, there are lots of reasons that they don't vote, right? But I do want to share with you a couple pieces around that. The first one graph on the left is comparing all of those other generations, right? The boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials, and their voting rates. And this is Gen Z, you know, their very first election, right? Was just 2 years ago, and they are already outperforming their voting rate than every previous generation's first time of voting. That's a big deal. And that's, again, one of these markers that from political science we look at and we say, okay, more people are actually getting civically engaged. And again, more people know and understand climate change. This should be something that we can truly activate. The good news, right, is you can see more people in each generation vote as time goes on, but that actually has a huge effect. And this first generation of voters matters, because it turns out the first time you vote, you are much more likely to become a lifelong voter if we can get you in young, right? Just like everything, if you can understand that process, get registered and understand it's important as a younger person, you will become a lifelong voter. And more than that, you will influence the rest of your household to be voters, right? So it is hugely important that we do focus on our youth. And on the right here are some of the, this is from Tufts University, who does some of the best research on youth voting at higher education institutions, right? So when I was working at Western on We Vote, we worked with them all the time. So like everyone thinks the youth are just apathetic or, you know, don't care or something. That's not actually true at all. The reasons, again, much like activating climate change folks overall, activating youth voters are solvable problems for organizers. Yes, this category here, 32% say, didn't matter. I don't think it's important. I think we can show them that it is important. I think that is changing. That's part of why it's changing. But these other reasons are ones that we can, again, as organizers, step in and help solve. I forgot or was too busy. Well, gosh, I can certainly remind you, right? I can help you get there. We can do so many things. I didn't have enough information. Well, that sounds like something we can provide, right? I had problem voting in person or absentee. Again, these are solvable problems by organizers that we can absolutely get. If we got this other 21% of folks who said they didn't have enough information as youth voters to turn out, that would be huge, would make this incredible difference, because again, they're almost the most likely to be climate voters. All right, I know I get excited when I talk about this one. I'm gonna keep going. I just don't want this to happen again, right? We have to make sure that this is seen as, again, the easiest, most civically engaged responsibility of our citizens. And that will only happen the more we pressure our institutions to be responsive. So what are we going to do about it? And this is my title, stolen from the great Fred Miller out there. From Earth Day to Election Day was his campaign name. And so we have totally run with that idea, launched this around folks' Earth Days to start to gain awareness as we build toward the election. And if you think back to MyCan's overall mission, right, what we're really interested in doing is mobilizing all those folks who already care about climate change into a much more well-coordinated, justice-centered movement, so that we can change that cultural norm and change that misperception and false reality of who cares about climate and why, and make equitable climate action the norm. And so the goals of this campaign are to drive voter engagement overall, to provide voter education, expand that access to the ballot to folks, again, that we know are likely climate voters and may not be exercising that right because of lack of information or other solvable issues, and make sure that climate is a top priority in this election. We are only a 501c3. We do not endorse candidates. We do not do direct lobbying or those pieces. So this is a nonpartisan, friendly campaign. one of the first things that we're going to tell folks to do, and I have a couple links, I'll try to throw those in the chat too. I'll send the link to our full climate voter hub. But one of the first things that we're going to do is follow, people like to say follow the science, and I say yes, follow the social science too, right? If we know that we are not talking about it enough, let's give some resources to actually talk about it. And so one of the things that we are doing, and that's the whole climate voter hub, is I threw that in the chat, and I'll try to do a couple more just very direct links, because we've got a really good clearinghouse on our website for resources. And so this next one in the chat is just the resources to talk about climate voting. And here we've borrowed from our friends at Citizens Climate Lobby. They have a higher education team focused on this. An organization called Neighbors United and the New Conversation Initiative are all working again with Yale on how do we actually message and talk about climate. And so the technique is called, all of us probably knew it as relational organizing, and the new term is deep canvassing. And we're not actually canvassing, right? Because we're a 501c3, but the same tactics can be applied to any conversation that you might have with that friend or neighbor. Again, our advice is to talk about it, and we know that might be scary and hard, so let's provide some resources about how to do that. And these tactics really are like communication 101, where you learn that communication isn't really talking, it's when you listen. And so most of these tactics are focused around a deeper, longer relational conversation. And when you do that, they have a 40% efficacy rate, folks, to turn out those eligible voters who we know already care about climate, but maybe aren't going to the polls. And you can also do the converse of elevating climate for those folks who are already going to vote. And I just gave you some examples here. This first box is, this is somebody I already know, and I've just found out they also believe in climate change, but they're just not going to vote. What might I say to them, right? And it really, the resources on our site and from Citizens Climate Lobby and from the deep canvassing folks and Neighbors United who are doing this across the country give you a whole script to follow. They give you webinars, trainings. There's just a plethora of resources to do that. But when you're talking to someone who already is with you on climate, right, and you're their neighbor, you talk to them all the time, you really are taking that personal approach and telling them why you care and why you vote, right? That is actually incredibly effective. There are also resources, as you can see on the right. Maybe it's a little tougher. Maybe it's someone who isn't with us on climate, but we know they're going to vote, and they're just in that cautious category, or they're our conservative friends. Ask those open-ended questions, right? Listening. And many of you might have already learned the acronym for darn cat, which is what this technique promotes. Learn someone else's perspective, right? What do they actually care about? What are their desires? What are they into? Find that common ground of the reasons that they care about something. And I bet with all of your knowledge out there, you can then connect that to climate and to the action and taking steps that you're already doing. So first thing, please talk about climate and talk about being a climate voter, and take advantage of the wonderful resources by these amazing groups to help us do that better. Then, of course, the sort of star of the show is our climate voter guide. This is a big piece and big endeavor that we are trying to do. This is targeted towards everyone running for the Michigan State House of Representatives, because, of course, our Senate isn't up for election this year in Michigan, and because we're a statewide org, and we really wanted to focus on, gosh, why weren't we able to get more out of last fall's policies? And so the questions really follow and track those pieces that I told you about earlier. We're asking candidates in our questions, and here I'm going to find the link for just the questions so that you can take a little bit deeper dive into that one, because they're also educational, right? Yes, we want folks to answer these, but we also hope these are really good kind of conversation starters for when you're at that candidate event, or at that fundraiser even, or whatever you're doing. They give a little bit of context, and they give links as well to many of these were, again, bills that were introduced in this current session. But we're asking folks about the renewable energy standard that we got, the 60%, and saying, do you support that? Would you support all the way to at least an 80%, if not 100% renewable energy? Are you willing to change that definition of renewable energy to remove fossil fuels from it and really focus on solar and wind and small hydropower? There's a bill right now by a Republican to eliminate the distributed cap, right? Are you with us on that? Could we get rid of that? We ask questions about climate justice, about advancing community solar, which if you follow MyCan, there is a hearing next Thursday on this bipartisan package. And our friends in Kalamazoo have a wonderful even recording of a conversation between the two senators that have introduced this bill where they talk through all of it. Right? These things, again, with our public pressure and our climate voter can happen. And this is how we think we can best demonstrate that public support as well as hold our democratic institution accountable. We ask about line 5, of course, which is a huge MyCan issue for us, about mobility and housing. We didn't forget about that campaign finance reform, right? We got to fix the one issue that we're all saying is causing us to not have the policies that the majority of Americans support. If that's because of money in politics, let's do something about that, right? And our friends at Michigan United have a great campaign called Take Back Our Power, which is a series of bills that are about limiting, especially the utilities, but many large corporations from their from private donations to candidates. Huge, huge deal. And also, we're helping support a climate literacy bill, right? Turns out most folks, it's like 90% that say we should be teaching climate in schools. And we're not, folks. We also work with a ton of educators. And so we're really trying to hold our candidates accountable with this series of questions. I hope not only they will ask and answer these, but again, I hope you will use these questions when you are out and about, either talking to anyone or any chance you have to talk to any candidate. These would be great questions that I would love to know what they said. So what can you do, right? Hopefully we have just a ton of nonpartisan resources. We'll also, of course, always link out to the Secretary of State, the amazing League of Women Voters, and all of their resources and their voter guide. Ours is specifically targeted to Michigan, to the House candidates, and to being a climate voter. I hope you'll be talking about climate. I hope you'll be talking to candidates about climate. And I put that toolkit word on here so I can remember to share it with you in the chat. We put together a fun little toolkit to, again, hopefully remove the information and other barriers. We want you to use this stuff, and we know we got to make it easy for you if we're going to do that. There's our climate voter toolkit. And so this, for example, this little piece here, that's an Instagram post that you can reshare, right? Because where are young people? Sorry, on Instagram. We're not going to fault them or shame them for it. We're going to meet them where they are and send them the resources that they need, right? This is a screenshot of the print flyer that we have, right? So you can be taking that wherever you're going and helping us get this word out about how we talk to each other and how we get candidates to answer these questions so that we can hold them accountable. And a new thing, I know a few of our steering committee members are on this Zoom here tonight. We are moving forward with some climate voter signs out of the great the climate voter CCL sign. We have several groups around the state who are working with MyCan. We're also doing a county level or municipal level voter guide. And that's our folks in Grand Rapids, the Grand Rapids Climate Coalition. They already had climate voter signs, so that was awesome. We're kind of stealing their design, if you will, but also capital area Friends of the Environment over in Ingham County, my own Kalamazoo County. We're working together on a county level voter guide, and Van Buren County is doing that. And so we're about to, folks, try to purchase a ton of climate voter signs like this. And it was hilarious to me because the Grand Rapids Climate Coalition, they did their first voter guide 2 years ago, and at the city level. It was very successful. And there's a kind of a young millennial that is one of their leaders. And I think some of the older folks convinced him we should do yard signs, like it's a political season. And he's a young millennial. He was like, no, why would we do anything print? Total digital campaign. And they were blown away, right, by how well yard signs still work, and how much it drove new people to say this idea, right, that we're talking about. Oh my gosh, there are folks that are climate voters everywhere in my community, and I didn't even know there was a whole organization of them in my own town, and now I know how to contact them. It was a huge like visibility campaign and piece for their local org. Those are our resources. That's what we're trying to do. And all of this is going to build, and I wish that would go away. All of that's going to build towards, of course, our annual event. And this year will be our 5th annual. Thanks so much to our friends in Oakland County who hosted us last year. We're going to pull it off again at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor on Thursday, September 26th, right in the heart of National Registration Week, right? This is not by any coincidence that we are focusing on civic engagement at a major university in September, right? And here's where the summit, yes, we will have some panels focused on the outcomes of our voter guides, of those county level voter guides, and what local groups are doing. But now is where we re-expand back to that vision of civic engagement in all of its different forms, right? We're also putting together panels on how do you just sustain your group? Why is it important to have interest groups at the local level in a functioning democracy, right? And how do we do that really well? And how do we support you? Nina Ignazik from Planet Detroit is going to host an amazing panel on the fourth estate. What is the role of media in a democracy and why we need local and climate journalism, right? We're going to have, of course, some election integrity pieces. And also, you know, as I get to go around the state, there's a real connection, as all of you know, between energy and justice and democracy. In urban Detroit, we call it energy democracy. If you're in the UP, we're calling it energy independence. Those are very interesting words to a political scientist, right? And there is this nexus. And so we're going to be exploring all of these pieces. Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition is going to come and do a ratepayer clinic. You know, how do we actually learn the skills to be civically engaged? How can we support each other in making and mobilizing so, again, that we can all meet this mission of building power for the climate movement overall and just making it undeniable of where we need to go and holding every institution accountable to the will of the majority of folks and for our own safety and health, right? So I know you're with me, so I'm gonna shut up now and hopefully have some good conversation and questions. I hope that wasn't too long. I know it's a lot of graphs, but you know, again, you got part academic, part advocate in front of you today. Thank you all so much for listening. I can't wait to hear what your insights, please help us. Like, what else should we be doing? How can we do this better? I look forward to that. And I'll stop sharing. There you all are. Hi.
Thanks so much. What a great talk. Appreciate all the information about polling and attitude and false perception and that positive inspiration from the environmental decade, the impact of fossil fuel money. Like, there's so much valuable information. We appreciate it. Do you want to take questions through the chat, or would you like people to unmute?
Either way. If you want to just unmute and let it fly, I'm okay with that.
All right, sounds good.
Okay. Go ahead, Fred.
Okay. Yes, thank you so much, Denise. I mean, having you know, a professor of environmental politics as the chief organizer is you know, putting those things together is really wonderful information for everybody. I just mention a couple things. The Sierra Club does endorsements and evaluations both at the local level and at the state level. that the state level, the Sierra Club will be focusing in on a few of the House races that are key. And there'll be ways to jump into that, even though if they're not your House, State House members, there'll be phone banks and things that the Sierra Club political committee on the state level will be organizing. The Sierra Club also endorses locally and makes those lists available, and our climate team can get involved in trying to let people know about that. And a lot of the things that Denise has been mentioning are things that we can do. So we'll send out again. I think this has been taped. I'm sure we'll send out a link to the recording to everyone who registered, along with the information about the meeting on the 18th for Southeast Michigan people. I just wanted to say one thing, well, a couple of things about what I see already happening. Climate is an issue already from the other side of the fence in Michigan and elsewhere. And two things in particular. One is an attack on EVs, and by extension, I think it's part of the sort of general attack on any regulation that they can say takes away something from right. They're going to take away your gas guzzler. They're going to take away your gas stove. And they're going to, trying to build fear of what climate action means. And on the other hand, there's an ongoing campaign to get a ballot measure on the ballot. They've not succeeded for this year, but if they get enough in the next couple months, it will go on the ballot in 2026 to reverse part of last year's clean energy bills, the part that established state standards for solar and wind siting and gave the final decision-making to the Michigan Public Service Commission to avoid the craziness in townships that has allowed a few people to block renewable energy projects. And that is not just a ballot measure, but an effort. It will be an effort to elect anti-renewable candidates. And so I think what we need to think about what our themes are that will address these things. And maybe you have some thoughts about what we can say writ large, and do that might help in that effort.
Yes. Well, thank you, Fred, for all of your work, and woohoo that the ballot initiative did not make its signatures, right? And one of the things I'll start with that one. One of the things that we and many other groups did was there is the Michigan Conservative Energy Forum, and a group, another arm under that is a group called Land and Liberty, and we have hosted them, and I can share that recording as well, to really have, right, sometimes I can't be the messenger, or we can't be the right messenger, and so it's not just the message, I think, but it's also the messenger. And so having a rural farmer who is for renewables out there giving those talks made a huge difference. And Land and Liberty and Michigan Conservative Energy Forum do a great job of walking through the myths, right? That we called that talk fact versus fiction, because all of the things that are being spewed about that campaign were really the same myths and disinformation campaign that all of us have been fighting for 40, 50 years now. And to hear it from a farmer themselves, like, no, this isn't doing that. Yes, this is about choice, right? It was the language that really worked. And I would say it's the same thing, Fred, with the electric vehicles, right? The Environmental Protection Agency has made a clean cars standard for light and heavy duty trucks. And of course, right, the anti stance to that is that's a mandate. but it's not, right? It's a here's what we are expanding. Our choice is usually the way that we can think about messaging that. And of course, for our conservative friends, when you think about the individual piece and the economic piece, talking about the economic benefits of renewables for everyone, talking about those health pieces and centering it around choice. Again, listening to the value base and the fears there, right? The fear is that my way of life is going away. I won't be able to do what I want to do. And actually, it's just the opposite. And so I think it's about really understanding that value base and speaking to it with respect and using language and messengers that can actually make a difference. And I hope that helped a little bit. What else we got out there? Go ahead, Charles. I can't keep up with the chat over here, Andrew. At some point, you just tell me what I missed over there. And I don't have my glasses on, so I can't hardly read half of that anyways.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really interested in your early comment about salience, the idea that politicians need to feel these opinions that the data says the electorate has.
Yes.
And you gave us a ton of resources, and I'm sure there's some advice in there. But how do you make politicians, or how do you help politicians feel that salience? Are there, a short list of things that you think are really important?
Yeah, absolutely. And, every one of our legislators who are climate champions, this is the number one conversation that I have with them, because they will always end their talks with, and we need you out there, Sierra Club, pushing us to do more. And I say, okay, like we don't have near as many resources as y'all do, but we'll keep it up, sure, right? And so what do you need most in that? And it really is the one-on-one, Charles. So, and it also, there are kind of two things that I'm going to say. The one-on-one, yes, we all do the form letter. It matters. It's really important. But anytime you can put those talking points into your own words and send a personalized, whether it's email, whether it's written, a phone call, actually at the state level, the phone calls matter, because those staffers answering that phone, if we really flood that phone line, they get overwhelmed, and then that's all they can type with their, I can't leave the phone, everybody's calling about this, right? That it really, really does matter, and it does work. And I know it takes time, and that means privilege and all of these things, right? But if we can all take that little bit and as a collective do that personal touch, it really does matter. And the other thing, and approach that my can is really interested in taking, it's why we focus so much on the grassroots and the local level groups, is that at that local level, you have even more of a voice. And if you can be talking to your city commissioner, your county commissioner, your whatever, that also then has a kind of up the chain effect, right? Because then that county commissioner, that state rep is going to talk to their county commissioner and say, what are you hearing? What's going on? And that can really, really amplify things. And my dream with some of these county level campaigns to then the state level campaign is that eventually what's going to happen is we're going to get county and city commissioners calling and influencing their state reps and senators saying, no, this is what we're doing, because my local folks, that this is where it's at. And now I need you to help me at the state level, right? Other than the other way around, which is usually, oh, here's our whatever incentive is, everybody bite, right? The much more kind of colonist model, if you will. If we can flip that to a grassroots piece and have our local electeds being the ones driving some of that, that's the gold standard of what we're really trying to get at. Yeah. And I see that a little bit of the questions, this is what happened with the incinerator waste in last year's bill. The Grand Rapids folks really fought that hard, and we didn't get it removed entirely, right? But because of a lot of grassroots pressure, there were our end dates at least around that, right? Those are some real wins. And I can read just barely, there's some stuff about data centers in there. No, not a full vote yet, but it's because of the pressure that we are putting on. There's a bill to bring have tax breaks for data centers in Michigan, and jobs are great, but those are also huge energy hogs. And so a lot of us are advocating for, if we're going to give a tax break, we ought to have a requirement for renewable energy and for the water that they use, right? That we could have some guardrails around that. And I'll tell you, the pressure is working, because that would have been a bill that should have just passed. And so many organizations have been sounding the alarm that most elected officials don't like controversy. And when they see that controversy out there, they will back off from that, right? And so we are already doing that. And it's because of those phone calls and those pieces. That's why show up for community solar next week, make a phone call, right? Send that email, whatever it is. It really actually does matter a lot. I don't know who was first. Did I answer that, Catherine? Was that your question about data centers? I think in the chat there. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Denise. Yeah, it was, and I would I'll probably look at Sierra Club or MyCan to find out bill numbers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Text me
Thanks.
later. We'll figure it out.
Okay.
Raya? Sorry if I totally messed that up.
Oh, no, it's okay. Yes, my name is Rhea. Thank you so much for the talk and all of the really eye-opening information that you gave about the different statistics. One thing I have been trying to think about and formulate a question for is, I am part of the LGBTQ community as well as the BIPOC community. And I have seen a lot of the people in these communities having to fight off a lot of political opposition, trying to tear away rights such as voting rights, sometimes marriage rights, voting rights, etc. And so I believe that, climate is an issue that everybody can get on board with. But it's like, do you have any advice on how to, how to talk to people who are already marginalized that, to get out and vote for climate interests? Because I know with a lot of the people in the Dearborn Arab or Muslim population, with their eyes on the different global conflicts and things like that, I have seen a lot of people moving to vote uncommitted. And so I fear that if there are a large amount of people believing that voting uncommitted, will change the political tide towards, their favor, it might tip the scale to an opponent that does not care at all about climate. So I know this is a very nuanced question, but I just am wondering what your thoughts are on how to convince marginalized people that are dealing with a lot of different things, and even people who are older are dealing with a lot of different things, how to vote in the best interests of climate, regardless of what's going on.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And first I'll say I actually really support and admire the uncommitted campaign, because that's why we do these kind of things, right? Because now is the time to hold that candidate accountable for their views before you hand over your vote. That's okay, right? I am not of the camp that we should just support one party over the other because they're a little bit better than the other guy on climate, right? We ought to still be able to do that, and to also hold everyone accountable, and to use the leverage of the power of our vote in this current moment. And I say that right up until the end, right? And then right, we're gonna have a choice in front of us, right? And what do we do, Rhea? And there your point is very well taken. And the more that we can talk about the intersectionality of justice, of marginalization, of rights, those are all really tied to the same underlying causes of why we ended up in this climate crisis, right? The democracy crisis, our voting rights, those are similar reasons. It is the elite counter-majoritarian, anti-democratic tactics that are really forcing us to be at the bay of these special interests. And the only way, right, unfortunately, we're going to change that is by helping our friends in those situations understand that a vote for climate is a vote for health, is a vote for justice, is a vote for more expansion to the ballot box. And then we got to do everything we possibly can to make it as easy as possible. All right. And thankfully, in 2018, Michigan at least passed the propositions, right? Many of you lived through this and know this now. We have at least expanded our absentee voting, right? Our voting in-person days, expanding the opportunities to make it just easier for folks to vote. And then it's on us with the privilege to be able to have that time to do these things, right? How can we help support those voters, whether it's the car rides to the polls, whether it's doing that voter registration drive in your neighborhood, whether it's helping folks get out to vote in the early voting period because they can't take that day, Tuesday off of work, right? It's that kind of mobilization that the rest of us really, really need to do to support our marginalized folks who I think will vote in the way that is for climate and for more rights. We know that population is with us, right, on all these issues. It's really a matter of supporting and getting that support for them to take that action. I hope that helps a little bit.
That helped a lot. Thank you so much.
Sure. We could do a whole other session on just that though, Raya, and happy to do that anytime. Hi, Mary Jo.
Hi. So you mentioned the league earlier, and is the
Yeah.
league a part of your network? Because
Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
so you probably know that we're going to be doing a voter guide.
Of course.
Okay.
Yes.
So
And
you know how to get questions into that.
Absolutely. And I don't think there's so much, to Raya's point, there's so much democracy and other issues that the league is focusing on. I don't know that they will be a state level climate question, but local leagues are absolutely able to control their own guides. And so
Right.
I know, again, some of those counties that we're working with, that's kind of how that's going to happen, is there'll be a question in their local League of Women voters guide, which if you're a league member, that's the gold standard. I learned everything I know about
411. Yeah,
guide.
but actually what I was going to say was the locals will not be asking the reps, as far as I know,
That's right.
Stuff for 411 because the state takes care of that. So that's why I'm saying it's important to at least get one question in there. And then I think that as long as you're, you don't endorse people, I think they might even put you as another source for people to look at when they're trying to decide who to vote for.
From your lips to the state chair, who's one of them was a good friend of mine. So we're working on exactly that. So even if there's not a state level climate question, League of Women Voters, which I'm still not sure, I don't know where they landed on that we could be, they would at least promote our resource. But yeah, at the local level, right, they are able to ask those questions in their local level guides. And that's kind of how we're coordinating that at the county level with some of those groups. So yep, huge props to League of Women Voters, Vote 411, all the resources, the gold standard for nonpartisan voter guide. So we hope to be as famous as that one day. And, candidates will fill out a whole bunch of other. We're also supporting, just so you know, right, the Science on the Ballot has a voter guide, thinking about it from their lens. And I've helped them with a couple climate questions. There's an organization called Michigan Student Power Alliance that works specifically with students, that is putting out a whole student progressive voter guide. So we're gonna put a couple of those up on our site as well, to really just showcase again all of the folks out there and these intersectional issues that are committed to holding elections accountable. And there's one of our League of Women Voters finest, Deb Fryman from my own Kalamazoo. What's up? Oh, you're on mute.
I want to mention that in Kalamazoo, we have climate questions at our forums, in addition to in our voter guide. And those questions, we've met with more people, encouraging them to fill out the questionnaire for the voter guide, because people, if you're not talking about climate change, nobody believes it's important. And we ask those questions and ask people to expand on them. And I think that it's really important for people to attend those forums and to get as many of the voter guides into the hands of people that need them. And one of the most important things for those students that are saying, I didn't vote because I didn't have the information I needed, is to get those voter guides in their hands. So I'm really glad that you're expanding that with us.
That's exactly it. And thank you for all of your work in Kalamazoo County and with the local league here where I'm at. I know you partner with We Vote and WMU to do that over so many years. And that's why we're at a university again, right? And why we're working with all these student groups, because that's exactly it. And the more, again, we can activate that population and get them started voting, that is just a benefit to all of us in our democracy, much less solving climate change. So appreciate that very much.
I'd also like to speak on behalf of my husband, who can't be here tonight because he's at a planning commission meeting, but he is very passionate about the community solar bill that are being considered. And it's a week from tonight, or a week from today, 1:30 on the 13th. And we got word tonight from Ed Rivet. I'm also with the Citizens Climate Lobby, and Ed Rivet has asked that we get as many people to the hearing as possible to submit cards. And people do not need to say that they want to speak on behalf of support. They just need to submit a card as a individual community member or as part of an organization to support that, because we don't really expect them to vote on this, but we need to have a huge showing of people that do support it. And those kind of appearances really do help move the needle.
Yes, thank you for that, Dad. They absolutely do. Like I said, even if you call or email, if you can't go to Lansing next Thursday, give the office a call, give the Senate Energy and Environment Committee, give all those members a call, send them an email. Even better if you're a constituent in one of their districts, as we are for the chair of that committee. So I know that we're going to be very active here in Kalamazoo. But that's exactly it, folks. It's go time, right? This is it, and we need everyone. What am I missing in the chat that you're going to make me put my glasses on, Andrew? Or can you read any of those? Is there anything else?
You're not missing anything in the chat. I think there's that one data center update question.
Gotcha. Well, what
There
else?
are lots of comments, Denise, about what a great presentation this is and what a great speaker you are. So thank you. Lots of gratitude from people that had to leave already.
Well, thanks, everybody. It's my pleasure. You can see I get a little worked up about it, don't I, as I get going? Yeah. It's why I do what I do. It's why you're all here, right? This is the social community that continues to drive all of us to do this work. And I appreciate every single one of you out there listening. And I know you're out there doing it in your communities. And that means the world to me to see all of you out there tonight.
We just want to, on behalf of the Southeast Michigan Sierra Club, thank you again. I don't think there are any more questions. If we did miss your question, feel free to raise your hand or jump in. I appreciate your analysis of the data and the concrete tools that you gave us, and all your work with MyCan and your passion. It was great. It was wonderful. thank you all for asking questions, thoughtful questions, and attending as well. If there are any questions, I guess that will be the end. Thank you, Denise.
Thanks,
And
everybody.
everyone have a nice night.
I will share the slides. You can have all the sources. Please use it. Thanks so much for hosting me. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.
Bye, Denise.
Bye, friends.